Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my review of the Fujinon XF 50mm f2 WR. And so there always are a string of letters on any Fuji lens. This one has R and WR. R means it has an aperture ring. WR means it has weather resistance or weather sealing. So I have often said that I think in many ways the sweet spot of the Fuji lineup is found in these f2 primes that are compact, fairly reasonably priced, but often give you very good optical performance. I've also noted that they tend to be a little bit better for autofocus than what some of the wider aperture lenses on the Fuji system tend to be, particularly if you're talking about on the video front, where sometimes they can be a little bit crude in operation. Not to say that everything is flawless here, but certainly it is if you're a Fuji shooter, I find that these are the lenses that tend to perform a little bit better for video work in general. So first of all, I think if you're looking at some of the compact APS-C bodies, I mean the sweet spot in many ways, I've got the XS10 here today, and these X2 or these F2 lenses, I should say, are really, they're such a great match. They give you, the ability to go out with a lightweight system that still gives you very high optical performance. And I particularly like the 35mm f2. The 23mm f2 is another nice option as well. And 16mm f2.8. There's a number of these lenses that stay really compact, have kind of a similar form factor and performance, and really give you some nice options there. This, of course, would be the longer of those series of lenses, in that 50mm, if you take Fuji's crop factor, which is right over 1.5 times, it gives you about a 76mm full frame equivalent lens. And so a short telephoto, not quite as tight a framing as an 85mm lens, but I think you can use it in kind of a similar way. So it's going to be a nice, lens for portraits and a nice kind of tighter framing for a variety of purposes. In this case, we've got a lens that, like this series of lenses, is nicely made. It has a feeling of quality to it. It doesn't feel like some kind of plastic fantastic, but has a good grade of materials. Fairly straightforward here. It does have the aperture ring as mentioned. That aperture ring is not declicked, and it doesn't give you an option of declicking, unfortunately, so not quite as useful for video work maybe. But what you do have is nicely defined 1/3 stop detents all the way through to f16, and then you also have the option of moving over into an automatic mode if you're the kind of person that prefers the camera to control the aperture, or you prefer to control it from within the aperture. So I always like when you have kind of a dual approach to that, because it gives you kind of the best of both worlds. Only other thing on the barrel is the manual focus ring, and it is tightly ribbed. It's, feels good quality. I do find on a lot of these Fuji lenses that the focus throw is really, really slow. And so if you want to make any kind of significant focus change, you've got to make rotation after rotation to try to get anywhere. And that can be a little bit frustrating in my experience. It's just, to go from minimum to infinity, it's a number of rotations to get there. And so, it's fine if you're fine tuning, but a little more frustrating if you're trying to make major focus changes. The lens hood here is, pretty simple, just plastic, but at least it is included, and it bayonets on fairly well. In my copy, it's not the most precise that I've seen, but, it stays in place nicely, no major problems there. The overall lens dimensions are basically 60mm in length, and right under that in the diameter of the lens. But of course, it's got a somewhat unique lens profile. It's unique compared to other lenses, not compared to these type lenses from Fuji, where it's actually quite slim up near the front, and thus you have only a 46mm front filter thread, and then it gets wider back towards the aperture ring section of the lens. And so overall compact, however, and weighs in at only 200 grams, which I noted is less than a quarter of the weight of, say, the 50mm f1.0 that I just reviewed. And so this truly is a lightweight lens, and you pair it with a camera like the XS10, and you're talking about a total combination of under 700 grams in terms of the weight. And so it really is a great kind of, backpacking, adventure type combination. So as noted, the autofocus is smoother and quieter here than what you're going to find with either the 50mm f1.0 or the 56mm f1.2. Both of those are fairly crude, and particularly when it comes to video AF, but even for stills focus, they just, you know, there's definitely noise in operation, and they're not as smooth as what this lens is. In this case, however, you get, you know, fairly snappy but very quiet autofocus, a tiny bit of clicking, but not much of anything that you'll actually hear in operation, and that the noise is in some ways more about the aperture opening and closing during focus than it is the actual autofocus, which itself is very quiet. So let's take a look actually at focus pulls for video, and so that you can get a sense of how quiet it is. Now, just to give you a point of comparison, let's take a quick look at the 50mm f1.0. Yeah, so definitely the 50mm f2, as I said, is a much better lens when it comes to you know, focus for video purposes. And then also, just for a quick comparison, let's take a look at the Viltrox 56mm f1.4, which might be considered an alternative to this lens. So of the three, I would say I give the highest marks to the 50mm f2, which is, you know, quieter and smoother in operation than either of the others. Definitely much better than either of the other Fuji 50mm-ish options that are available out there. The one thing that I do continue to find to be a little bit of an issue, and that is that when it comes to, for example, shooting a session like what I am right now, where it's more of a monologue and I've got a static subject, I'm filming on a Canon right now, and with the Canon, it probably hasn't, you know, moved focus in a visible or disturbing way at all. But I find that if I try to do the same kind of thing with a Fuji, and this is with any of the Fuji bodies I've tested so far, and a lens like this or any of the lenses, I end up getting a lot more hunting than what I would like. As you can see in this section, when I shot a review for the XS10, that I just got, you know, just an occasional pulsing where all of a sudden focus would just leave and come back, and so I think that's an area where Fuji needs to make improvements. What has improved is that IAF works better now, and you just get more reliable focus results in a variety of situations with their most recent either focus systems or firmware updates. So let's take a look at the image quality and to see what you're getting in this compact little optic. So let's take a look at our vignette and distortion here. As you can see, looking at an uncorrected raw result, we've got a bit of a pincushion distortion. It was about a -5 to correct for it here in the, you know, my manual correction on the right. And you can see there is a fair bit of vignette as well. And it's, you know, mostly concentrated into the corners. And you can see my correction on the side here. I've taken about around a 60 to 65 in terms of the amount of vignette, and then slid the midpoint all the way over to the left to give us an even result. So it corrects fairly well. Of course, with Fuji, you have very good correction profiles, and so here, if you just engage the profile in software or in camera, it does a good job with both vignette and distortion. So taking a look at our resolution and contrast, I'm using the XS10 body for this. So that's the 26 megapixel X-Trans sensor, which is basically their top of the line sensor. What we can see here is that at a pixel level, this is a 200% magnification, which is how I do these tests. You can see that contrast is only okay. It's definitely lacking. Seems to be like a little bit of smear on there. And so detail is actually not bad, but contrast is not particularly good. What we can see, however, is a fairly even performance right off into the corner. So for curiosity's sake, I thought it'd be worth looking at the Viltrox 56mm f1.4, since price-wise, it's a competitor for this particular lens. So one thing you can easily see is that the Viltrox is packing more contrast punch comparatively at f2. Now it has the advantage of being stopped down a stop, and so what we can see is that while there isn't necessarily a lot more detail there, there is some. I think it is a little bit sharper in the center and mid frame, but contrast really lags on the Fuji at f2. Now, if we look down into the corners, however, the situation reverses. The Fuji is a little more even in its resolution consistency, whereas the Viltrox fades a little bit in the corner. Now, stopping the Fuji down to f2.8 here on the right, you can see makes a remarkable improvement when it comes to contrast. Things look much better. That's true on the mid frame where it looks really good, and down into the corner where, while the acuity is not off the charts, the contrast now looks good, and there is a reasonable amount of detail that is there. If we take a look at back at the Viltrox, we find that it's definitely improved in the corners here at f2.8, and so the difference isn't as profound. But the Fuji is a little bit better, and so while I think the Viltrox is still a little bit sharper a lens, the Fuji is also much closer here at f2.8 in terms of performance. I do give a little bit of an acuity edge, however, to the Viltrox lens. Stopping on down to f4, you can see that the difference in the center of the frame is only minor. Likewise, it does improve in the mid frame, however, better contrast definitely stands out there. And down in the corners, things are just continuing to improve with a little bit more contrast, but also a little bit more acuity where you can see some of these fine details are a little bit more visible. Stop on down to f5.6 to get a nice and crisp result in the corner. Now here's an f5.6 result with some, real-world three-dimensional objects here. And so what you can see is that going back to 100% magnification, everything looks, good here. Detail is, it's not the best that I've seen, but it's, everything is resolving nicely. There's good contrast on those textures. Everything looks quite good here. And so it definitely, can give you good results when you stop it down a bit. Now this particular shot shows that it's also doing a pretty good job of controlling longitudinal chromatic aberrations. So we've not only got some shiny surfaces here where you can see there's no purple or green fringing, but also if we look in the bokeh areas, you can see a slight bit of green fringing there. But over on this side, with more out of focus areas, we don't see a lot of fringing there. So it is controlling those aberrations reasonably well. Here's also a scene with a lot of, really bright snow that transitions to dark areas. So another place where you would see a lot of fringing. And what you can see is that, it really is fairly well controlled here. I'm not seeing any kind of real world issue with any kind of fringing here at this point. So they've done a good job of correcting those aberrations. So taking a little bit of a look at the bokeh quality here, we can see that there definitely is some of that lemon-shaped deformation as you stop down to f2.8. It's starting to form towards, circular, and so the geometry is improving and definitely more even, like in this portion, where this still looks kind of lemon-shaped and it's quite round at f2.8. So not a bad result at f2.8. You can see, particularly at f2, some fringing around those bokeh circles. We saw a little bit of that in our previous shot, and you can also see there's a little bit of just general busyness in there, but not really any true concentric rings that form, and so looked at globally, it looks pretty good. Stopping on down to f4, you do start to see the shape of the blades a little bit more pronounced, and so while it's more circular across the frame, it's not quite as round as what you see at f2.8. So if you want, even bokeh circles across the frame, I would say f2.8 is probably the sweet spot. Now, real-world bokeh is a little bit harder for me to determine, at least outdoors right now, because as you can see, snow is so bright that it really grabs the eye. At the same time, however, pretty good detail and contrast on our subject. Contrast could be a little bit better, as we've seen. But as we look towards the out of focus area here at close focus distances, it's quite soft, and so I like that. Here's another shot here where, once again, I feel like our detail is pretty good on our subject, and then the background is nicely blurred out. And so the quality of the blur, even though it's not going to be incredibly high with only an f2 maximum aperture, the quality of it is quite good. One final area to consider, and that is that our magnification is 0.15 times, so not exceptional, but certainly a whole lot better than the 50mm f1 that only gives us a it's like 0.8 times, and likewise the 56mm f1.2 is similar. And so this is the most macro, if you want to call it that, of the bunch. I also thought that the up close performance was pretty good at f2 here on the left. Contrast and detail aren't bad, and stop down to f2.8 it actually looks really nice and crisp. Also worth noting is that we've got a fairly flat plane of focus, and so you've got detail off towards the edges, not just in the very center. So overall a good, if not exceptional, optical performance. And so as you can see, there's not really any major misstep there. It does have a bit of Vignette Distortion, a little bit heavy on the vignette perhaps. That's probably the biggest shortcoming. But Fuji has such good profiles that, that's really probably not going to be much of an issue for you in your real world use. I would just say that, at the same time, there's nothing particularly dramatic or exciting about the lens. And so it's more about a solid performance than you're just wowed by the look of the images themselves. And I think for many people at this price point of around $500 US, that's probably going to be enough. And if you're just looking for something that's reliable and gets the job done, this is a great choice. It's not maybe as exotic as the 56mm f1.2 and certainly not as the 50mm f1.0. It's also infinitely more practical in many situations, particularly if you are a video shooter. And so at the end of the day, I continue to believe that it's this series of lenses that really, to me, make the Fuji platform make the most sense, where you can get high performance, but you can also get, a very compact package that all combined is easy to bring along, easy to use. I'm Dustin Abbott. If you look in the description down below, you can find linkage to an image gallery and check out some photos there. There's also buying links there if you'd like to purchase one for yourself. And of course, beyond that, linkage to follow me on social media, to become a patron, to sign up for my newsletter. And of course, if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button right here on YouTube. Be sure to click for the notification so you know when new content drops. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, and let the light in.